You have now arrived at your destination.
Dharmesh, my word, I couldn't be more thrilled to be doing this one. I've wanted to do it for quite a while, so thank you so much for joining me today first.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been years in the making. I've been thinking about this for a while now, but my introverted self, I keep pushing back on podcasts. So,
Listen, I'm so thrilled that you agreed to it. I have no idea what made my British accent appealing to do, but I'm thrilled to make it happen. I want to start also, I heard a little bit of a context that your wife, Kristen, is the reason that you and Brian got together in the first place, scouting him at an MIT Sloan cocktail party. So, can you take me to that party? What
sure.
happened between you and Brian, and how that led to HubSpot?
Yeah. So it's a fun story. So. Both Brian and I joined this class at MIT for grad school. It's part of the business school. And they had this kind of mixer, social cocktail party thing, so the incoming students and the classmates could kind of meet each other, and significant others were invited. And you don't know me that well, but the worst possible thing you can do to me is put me in a social environment with a bunch of people I don't know and have me make small talk about things I don't know anything about or don't care about. And so, because I'm the kind of hyper introvert, and there's no exaggeration here. My wife, on the other hand, is not. She's at the other end of that spectrum. She's super friendly, loves meeting people. And so what she'll do at these kinds of events is she'll kind of scout the room. And I'll be hiding in a corner somewhere, and she'll go scout the room. She'll talk to people. She'll be parts of little groups. And then she'll come back with a scouting report. It's like, oh, yeah, I met Priya over here. She's awesome. She's from tech. I think you'll really like her. And then she came back, and this is interesting. She came back and said, yeah, I met this guy, Brian. I don't know that the two of you are going to hit it off because he's kind of got a sales background. He's really into sports and the Red Sox, and it's like you just don't have a lot in common. That was her first, and I've known her, now 25 years. I mean, at the time it has been 10 to 15 years. So, and I trust her judgment. Like, she knows me, and she's been right pretty much 100% of the time, except this one time, right? So, so then classes start. And I get to know Brian, and he's in there, and like I remember him, from the party, because I did say hi that evening, but it was a very kind of, I wasn't curt, I'm still my pathologically polite self, but we just didn't connect more than that kind of very brief interaction at that cocktail party. But then we're taking classes, and the more classes I take, the more time I'm around him. I'm like, hey, this guy's smart. Yeah, he may have kind of grown up in sales, but he's like no salesperson. And no disparagement intended to salespeople. They're just different, wired differently than I am. And we just hit it off. And then, about midway through kind of graduating, we started noodling on the possibility of us like doing a company together. And so, which is really weird because the one thing I had promised my wife is not that I wouldn't spend time with Brian. She was fine with that. But that I would never do another startup, right? Because I had done startups my entire career. That's all I pretty much knew. And then she had known me even before I had done my first startup. And she likes to joke, somewhat jokingly, that it's like, oh, had I known you were going to be an entrepreneur, I'm not sure that this would have worked out because being married to an entrepreneur is not the easiest thing in the world. But anyway, so I had promised her, and that's why I went back to MIT. I'm like, I'm going to go to grad school. I'll go get a PhD. And my kind of path was to kind of teach. That was the original idea. I was not going to do another startup. I promised her I was not going to do it. Then Brian and I met, and we really hit it off. And the reason HubSpot started was two reasons. One is just I wanted to work with Brian. And two, we both had a shared passion for SMBs. And we can talk more about that later. But that was the kind of the original. It's, it comes down to a cliche, but it's all about the people. And it's like, okay, this is someone I want to like work with and do something with. And it was kind of natural to do a startup. But anyway, that's the story.
Dharmesh, I specialize in going off schedule. You have such a lovely relationship with your wife. You see it on social as well. I saw the post about the lawnmower, which I thought was hilarious. Help me out here, Dharmesh. What's the secret to such a fulfilling and wholesome marriage?
The simple thing is you have to kind of enjoy each other's company. That's the number one thing. Like, enjoy spending time with each other. I think number two is there has to be kind of mutual admiration and respect. And those are much easier things to define than love and things like that. It's like, okay, it's a little ephemeral. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, but I can tell you who I have respect for. I can tell you who I admire. I can tell you, just good people in the world. It's like, and it's interesting, and we're very complementary. So she's not from tech at all. She was a pharmacist by training, and kind of what made us hit it off over over a long period of time is that mutual respect. But then it's like we make a good team. So we like to joke in the family that she wants to save the world. She got an environmental degree, like she's out, and I want to own it, right? I'm the capitalist, warm-hearted but red-blooded capitalist, and so we make a good pair. I'm out. I'm relatively good at making money, and she will be great at channeling it to good causes.
And absolutely, I heard about you kind of giving away 90%, which I thought was awesome. I do want to start on your leadership style, though, because it's a fascinating topic. And bluntly, you're an even more fascinating subject than most when we dig in. And so when we think about leadership styles, how would you describe yours today? And then reflectively, how's that leadership style changed over time?
I struggle with the word leader, because I really think of myself as that. Well, I'll tell you I'll call it my operating style, for lack of a better, and obviously leadership or some sense of it is part of that. There are a few kind of fundamental core attributes to my operating style. One is around transparency. And what I mean by that is that whatever it is that's going on in my head, I share it. Right? It's like, okay, well, here's what I think we should do. Here's the path I think we should take. Here's what I think is broken in the world. Here's, what I think we did well. Here's what I think we didn't do well. And I kind of put it out there. That's kind of the number one thing is transparency. And then kind of combined with that, and it's going to sound weird saying the word because it's a paradox in a sense, but is around having the humility to kind of listen. It's like, okay, if you put the stuff out there, but you have to be kind of open to debate. You have to be accepting of the fact that you don't know all the answers, you haven't figured it all out. Yes, you may have had some experiences, you may even have some data, you may have some more context than someone else, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. And so kind of having the humility to say, I'm still constantly learning, and there's every interaction I ever have with anyone, be it a person or a company, whatever it is, I feel like there's something to be learned there, right? Is having the humility to know that you don't know everything. And we're all kind of on this journey at varying stages. We've picked different paths, but I think that's kind of part of it, and it's both. I kind of value it in myself, and I recognize it, and I value it in others. Like the best people I've ever met have a very kind of low ego to accomplishment ratio, right? It's like we all meet lots of people that have accomplished a lot, but then their ego kind of balances out, so the ratio itself is not great. The best people are the ones that have accomplished a lot, but have very little ego in proportion to that.
How do you test for that low ego, high accomplishment when hiring?
Well, when hiring, it's actually relatively straightforward. Do they take full credit for all the awesomeness that has happened to them or around them or because of them, or do they share that credit? That's one thing. So in this, even post-hiring, which is an easier question to answer, the best people in my mind or my experience, HubSpot and otherwise, are the ones that when things go wrong, and things will always go wrong, they will shoulder the responsibility, right? They're not trying to shift blame. It's like, oh yeah, this went wrong because we didn't get the budget, or this person kind of pushed back on us, or we should have done it my way and we chose to do this other thing, and therefore it didn't work. The best people shoulder responsibility, but share the credit. So when things do work, they're like, yeah, I know this went really well, and it's great that we kind of beat the numbers or accomplished this, but it really was Susie over here that was kind of instrumental in that happening, and it was this over here, and I'm just glad to have been part of it, right? Like it's just people that have that kind of low ego tend to really give disproportionate credit to others in terms of what they've accomplished.
I need to give credit to Kieran on your team for this one, which I loved. I'm going to borrow it a lot, actually. But he asked the question, what's the most difficult but valuable lesson you've learned in the HubSpot journey? In other words, it was super tough to go through, but you're glad you went through it.
That's interesting. I'll say this: it kind of falls into the kind of the biggest mistake, and we still have not recovered from it yet. And I'll give you the context. So when HubSpot started, first it was Brian and I. We met in grad school, as I mentioned, and then so he was CEO. We'll talk about that. I was CTO. Our VP of Sales was from MIT grad school, same school. Our head of marketing, same school. Head of engineering, same school. So the first 6 hires, all men, all from the exact same school, same program, had the same, not necessarily the same graduating years, but just in that little cluster. And so the mistake, I think, and this was blindingly obvious now, was not obvious to us then, is just it's the opposite of diversity in terms of the team, right? It's like and we had not really even thought about it. To be candid, this was 16 years ago. So we hadn't really deliberately thought about culture or diversity, all those things. And it was about 5 years later before that kind of became one of the core pillars of HubSpot. But if I could do it all over again, that was the big mistake. And the challenge with that particular mistake is, okay, so I'm going to take a slight excursion here. It's related, but it's important. So we all understand financial debt. We get it. So financial debt is, I need the cash now, I can deploy it, I'm going to pay an interest rate, but the cash is worth it to me now in order to accomplish the thing I want to accomplish. Awesome, we get it. We have then kind of translated that into something called technology debt. Anyone that's ever written software is like, oh, I'm going to take this shortcut in the code right now because I need to ship the product, and I know that I'm going to accrue an interest rate because it's going to be harder to maintain, it's going to be buggier, and I'll come back later and clean that code up and pay off that technology debt, right? And that's a well-accepted term, people know it. Along the same spectrum, there's a thing I call culture debt. And culture debt is when you hire either non-diverse teams or you hire people that are jerks that don't really fit and no one wants to be around. When you make those suboptimal or wrong decisions, you accrue what I call culture debt. Now, it is the most insidious form of debt. And the reason I say that is, number one, you don't really know what the interest rate is. That's a problem, right? It's like, okay, I made this bad hire. They're just jerk. No one likes to be around them. But the problem is you never really can fully pay it off because it's so toxic. And so, like, for instance, if you make a bad hire in your first 10 employees, let's say just one bad hire, the next 40 people, 50 people, 100 people that join are going to be impacted by that person. It's like, oh, here's what's accepted here. This is okay. This behavior is acceptable. This is the kind of company we are. And then even if you let them go, the roots of that toxicity are still kind of in there. So you're never really sure if you ever paid it off. Financial debt, you write a check, you're done. Technology debt, you rewrite the code, you're done. Culture debt, 16 years later, like we are now, you're still sort of paying that price, right? And that's why, so that was my kind of biggest mistake, hardest one lesson is not investing more intentionally in culture earlier. And yeah, so.
Listen, you brought it up. I just spoke to Pat about it, so I have to ask. The culture decks that you put together, what is the process with which you go through to put them together? I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, so there's only one deck. It's called the Culture Code deck. The reason it's called the Culture Code is a lot of people kind of mistake it. It's like, oh, like it's a code of conduct or a moral code or something like that. It is not. The Culture Code was my kind of manifestation of if I could write an operating system, literally write Python code, let's say, to run the company and help make decisions and do these things, this is what it would be, right? And the kind of V1 of it, well, let's take half a step back. On the top 3 list of things I've learned in 30 plus years now being in the professional world is that culture is a product. Culture is a product. So we build a product. If you're a tech company, you build a product for your customers. We all understand that. We understand product management. We understand the importance of getting customer feedback and product market fit and all those things. We fix bugs. We add features. We understand that discipline. We can literally take 95% of that same mindset around product and apply it to this thing called culture. And so here's what happens when you think about culture as a product. You're like, oh, well, I would never build a product without asking the customers what it is they want. Why would you build a culture without asking the employees what it is they want? You would never build a product and not ask for the customers to report bugs that are really kind of prohibiting them from doing what they need to do. Why would you not ask your employees if the culture is prohibiting them from what they need to do? So we've literally taken the idea of culture and made it a product in every conceivable way that we can. And that has dramatically helped.
But what is the right way to bring employees into culture creation process with you? Is it a simple, what would you like in the culture that we have here? What questions do you ask? How do you ask them? How do you get that feedback?
Yeah, so the number one thing is so every company has a culture, whether you deliberately designed it or not. The hope is that by being intentional about it, you can get the culture you want versus one that's kind of thrust upon you. And the kind of second law of thermodynamics is your culture will suck outside of intervention, right? It's like it's entropy. And so the way you kind of involve people is you involve people. And this is a painful process. So I will tell you, I began writing the Culture Code deck. This was, I'll say, maybe 11 years ago, give or take a little bit. And I was kind of volunteered into it by my co-founder, Brian, who had gone to this kind of CEO. He was part of a CEO group that they would kind of sit around and meet and talk about CEO issues and sing CEO songs, sit in a circle and do all that kind of thing. I'm kidding. But they did sit in a circle. And one of the topics one time was around culture and how important culture was. And we were early in our history at this point. And so he comes back to me. We have one of our founders' dinners that are multi-hour affairs. And he's like, Dharmesh, I just got back from my CEO club kind of meetup thing. And the topic was culture. And they're like, culture is like super important. I'm like, awesome, Brian. It's super important. He's like, why don't you go do that? I'm like, I have no idea what you mean, but from what little I know about culture, it involves people, and I'm the least social person in the entire company. I'm the least qualified to do anything related to culture. But I was a team player. I'm like, okay, fine. So I originally treated it as a data collection exercise. So my assumption was we already have a culture. We sort of need to and it feels like it's working. People seem to be happy, but let's find that out first. So I ran a survey. It's like, hey, I'm like working on culture at HubSpot. I want to know whether A, you're happy at HubSpot or not, right? It's a product. And if so, why are you happy? If not, why are you not happy? And a weird thing happened when I sent that first email out to the employee base. People reacted with a negativity that I had never seen in my professional career. And this was weird, caught me off guard. And the kinds of comments I got back is like, oh, so this is what we're doing now. Oh, so now it's going to be like putting mission statements up on the wall. We're going to become one of those companies. And then the one that really got me, and by the way, these are all people I had personally hired and recruited, right? This is not random folks that had never met me. It's like, how can you, just by virtue of even bringing up the topic of culture and asking very benign questions, it was not I did not think that there was going to be this kind of negativity, but the one that really got me is like, oh, Dharmesh, I just don't think HubSpot's the kind of company now that I thought I joined. I'm like, nothing has changed, dude. Like, what is wrong? And so once we got through that, and I kind of talked people off the ledge, I understood better why they were reacting negatively, is because culture as it had been practiced before was mission statements on the wall and highfalutin words like integrity and this and excellence and whatever. It's like, and that's what they thought we were going down. It's like, okay, well, we've always been a very kind of practical, solve for the customer thing. And now it feels like this was one of those kind of big company things where you bring management consultants in and come up with fancy words like integrity and excellence. And so once I convinced them that was not my intent, once we got through that, and then the first version of the Culture Code deck was out there to answer exactly one question. What kinds of people are likely to succeed at HubSpot? That was, and the way I had framed it in my head, hence the name Culture Code, is if I could write a function, like literally code, what would the kind of coefficients of that function be? I might not know the weights as far as the relative importance of those, but at least let's identify the things that seem to be maybe not causal, but at least correlated with success at HubSpot. And that's when we came up with the original set of what some people call values. I think of them as coefficients or the attributes of people. And transparency was up there. Humility was up there in terms of things. Empathy was up there in terms of the attributes that really kind of stood out. And so once we had that, then we had, it's like, okay, well, these are the kinds of people that seem to succeed at HubSpot and tend to be happy at HubSpot, thereby creating other people that are happy at HubSpot. Let's hire more of those people. So we used it as the baseline for hiring kind of from that point forward. So we would every kind of interview and then every promotion, and we kind of wove it through the entire company that says you have to have, it doesn't have to be 10 out of 10 on each of them, but these are the things we care about. And they're not like excellence, right? They're humility, they're transparency, they're empathy, adaptability. And so anyway, that's the somewhat long story around the Culture Code deck. But this is, if I had to provide one piece of advice to startups, regardless of where in the kind of stage of evolution you are, the best time to work on culture is time t equals 0. Simultaneous to thinking about the product, think about the people. I'm not suggesting you write 128 slides in that first month, first year, but at least have it on a paper napkin, at least have a conversation with your co-founder that says, this is the kind of company we want to create, and these are the kinds of people that we want to attract. And so the best time is time t equals 0. The next best time is time t equal now. So if you have not done it yet, wherever you are in your overall kind of evolution, start working on it now, start having those conversations.
culture, hiring, the qualities we look for, it's all decisions. And again, I have to give Kieran on your team credit for this, but I love it again. He asked, when you have very difficult or problematic decisions that need to be made, what's your framework for solving difficult problems? And do you have a process you go through?
Yes. So I'll talk at two levels. One is a very kind of high order, going back to the kind of the early stages of HubSpot, is how founders, we as two co-founders made high order decisions. And we had a very simple framework for this. Number one is, do we both agree on the path on this particular decision? It's like, are we choosing the same option? Would we choose the same option? If the answer is yes, decision made, there's no conversation to be had. We both agree, it's the same path. If we don't agree, does one of us feel much more strongly about their choice than the other? By the way, it has nothing to do with areas. Like it could be, I'm CTO, it could be about the product. He's head of marketing, sales, and everything else. It could be about pricing or something else, sales related. It doesn't matter what area it falls under. Does one of us feel much more strongly? If one of us feels much more strongly, they win. We pick their path. If both of us feel very strongly and still disagree, then we debate, and we debate, and we debate, and then ultimately, Brian decides because he's CEO. But we run it as a partnership, but we go through that kind of heuristic, and there have been, like, I can count the number of times in the fingers of one hand and still have fingers left over, the number of times that has like come to that, where we go to debate, and ultimately, Brian has to decide. We will usually kind of, one or the other of us will talk the other one into it. It's like, okay, so the debate usually will resolve it. It doesn't have to come, ultimately by decree. It's like, okay, we're going to go do this. That's a rare occurrence.
Now, can I ask, when I look at you and I listen to you say, Dharmesh, it just seems all very natural. It's all so fluid and innate within you, this kind of core operating style. In terms of insecurities, I think it's helpful and humanizing for founders to hear even people like you have insecurities in operating. What do you think are your big insecurities today operating?
Well, the big one is just around imposter syndrome, right? And everyone has it. People talk about it. I've had it my entire life, and I didn't know what it was called until much later in my life. But it's around. So my insecurity is the fact that I grew up with kind of very modest, very, very modest means, and that's okay. Lots of people grew up, but I just didn't have access to like a world-class education. I didn't get even access to a computer or technology until I was in my 20s, which is kind of unheard of, right? So I feel like I'm constantly like catching up, right? Like others have a massive head start, and I think I'm a reasonably smart guy, so I have a decent amount of confidence there. But in terms of just raw exposure, things I've experienced, things I got exposed to kind of early on in my career, I just didn't, and I have an insecurity around that to this day, right? It's like, okay, well, if and I'll single out Zuckerberg and Gates and these folks, whatever, that are kind of some of the icons of tech. It's like, wow, like they went to the best schools. They had computers when they were like 12, right? And they were programming when they were 14. It's like how do you compete with that? How do you reproduce that alchemy of having access to resource? And obviously they're driven, super smart people. I'm not saying I would have been that, but it's easy to ask myself, it's like, okay, well, like, do I even have a fighting chance of ever like accomplishing anything given like the kind of slow start I got? So that's the...
Do you compare yourself to others?
Not really, no. I also don't really keep score in the classic way. I don't have... I've never really had like goals other than I'll say this. I won't say never. Early in my career, kind of money mattered to me, simply because I like to kind of shape the universe to my liking to some degree. And I cared about money because I had never had it before, and money kind of bought freedom and allowed me to shape the universe more to my liking. But other than that, I really don't kind of compare. I'm competitive, right? But not, it's like, oh, well, I want to be X or Y or Z. I don't tend to do that. But I love learning from people. I have immense amounts of respect for, but I like different things about different people, both the kind of icons of business and tech or whatever, but even all the way kind of up and down. It's like, okay, well, here's this one thing I can learn from this person that's just, could be life-changing. I have a immense amount of patience to the degree I have any kind of superpowers. One of them is around the ability to have the patience to endure the noise if you know there's some signal there. And then over time, the kind of compounding value of that signal is immense. So I have the patience to, like, okay, I can sit through a 1 hour, 2 hour talk, and if I get 30 seconds of just value out of it, and the value is high enough, I'm like, that was worth it. That was worth it. I don't begrudge that time because the rest of it just wasn't relevant or wasn't good.
You said about modest means there when you were growing up. Obviously your son, who I think is 11 or 12, obviously has a very different lifestyle than you did growing up. How do you instill the same work ethic and values given a very different style of upbringing? It must be tough.
It is. It's borderline impossible, right? It's because it's such a diametrically opposed thing. So then the question is what we will call kind of drive or ambition or just this kind of need to build or create value, is that innate, right? Or is it because you're kind of hungry and you have a chip on your shoulder and you've got a point to prove? One could easily make the case that it sure helps a lot to have the hunger because you're going to have that drive because you have no choice but to not have it, right? It comes down to survival. Having said that, the one thing that I have found works better than just like, oh, you need to like work harder, do this, whatever, that, for anyone that has kids knows that doesn't really work that well, is to kind of tap into the things he does care about and like. And he is one to kind of keep score, right? And then and he obviously loves video games like many children his age. But one of the things, I've done recently, a short excursion, is that, so he's taking a Python programming class, right? Just, doing all the things I loved. And I'm trying to relive my life through him. He asked for it. He's been wanting to do it. He loves tech. But then I'm like, okay, well, it's really abstract for him. He doesn't really know, like he's building these kind of very, very crude, simple games because he's, hasn't even had Boolean algebra as a class yet. So it's hard to teach him, but he's learning. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm going to build an app on a weekend. So I decided on Saturday evening, I'm going to build an app. And I wanted to build, I'm not going to tell you the backstory for why I chose this, but I don't know if you've ever played Wordle, the word game.
I love it.
So I decided to build a Wordle trainer first. I'm going to build this app. And then ultimately I built a Wordle, we'll call it a competitor for lack of a better term. Anyway, so Saturday night, I decided to do it with the deadline that Sunday I'm going to launch it to the world. And the motivation here was I wanted to walk him through the process. It's like, okay, Sohan, we talked about this on Saturday evening. I'm writing in the exact same language that you're learning right now. I'm writing it in Python. Tomorrow, we're going to get up and we're going to launch it. And I'm going to show you what Google Analytics is so we can watch traffic coming in. I'm going to show you how I tweet, because he knows what social media is and what impact that has on the Google Analytics. And I'm going to show you how time zones matter, because as people are waking up and they come across these, like here are all the things that go into it. And we can kind of watch this little thing that was nothing when we woke up this morning and now is something more than nothing, right? It's not necessarily a blowout success, but that helps connect the dots in his head, right? So now, when he has ideas, he's like, okay, well, I don't have the skills yet to do the thing that Dad just did, but I know it's possible. I know it's possible to take an idea that can be solved through software, and I can actually launch something. This is the beauty of the internet. You don't have to ship floppy. Like, you couldn't do this 20 years ago, but now you can. The entire world is connected by this beautiful thing called the internet. Anyway, and that thing, by the way, took off. Now it has 6 million players. It's called wordplay.com. But he and I kind of share the product management in terms of what features to add, and he uses the app every morning, does the bug testing, and reports stuff back to me. It's awesome. It's been a great project. Anyway,
I absolutely love that, and it's such a cool project to do together. I do have to ask, when we think about kind of product itself, I actually don't spend much time on product at all today with founders when I'm investing. And I don't because it's so transient. What I do spend time on is distribution and how they think about it. How do you think about the weighting of product versus distribution? And I think like the build it and they will come is crap. It's all in distribution. Like your Wordle competitor, yeah, but you've got 300,000 followers on Twitter and you could start Flywheel like never before. Do you agree with me? And how do you think about that product versus distribution?
I do agree with you. So I'll share this with you. And this is something we applied at HubSpot, but something I've believed for a long time in terms of startups. And I've been, in and around startups pretty much my entire career. Is that there are like 3 kinds of risk when you start a startup. Risk number 1 is the risk that you won't be able to build the product you envision. Like you just can't create it. Okay, that's risk number 1. Risk number 2 is you're able to build it, but that there's a risk that there's just no market for it. There's no customers. You built the product, but there's no one there to actually buy it at the levels that. And the third one is that you build the product, there is a market there, but the capital necessary to actually build a business around that product, you either can't get access to or you can't make it happen. That's the kind of financial risk or capitalization risk. Most founders in tech companies, they almost always jump directly into the product risk and try to mitigate that risk by just starting to build the product. It's like, okay, well, the other tool, either they don't think about it or they think about it, but they think those are secondary. My advice, and strong advice, is that we should stipulate that you will be able to build a product. Rarely have I ever met founders. There's some obviously doing really cutting edge stuff where maybe it's possible that they'll ever really actually create the product. That's like 0.01% of the cases. So let's stipulate, if I'm talking to, let's say we're chatting and you're a founder, I'm like, let's stipulate that you'll be able to build the product that you envision. It may take you 6 months longer, a year longer, but you'll be able to build it. We have a hard time stipulating that even if you had that product, that there's a market. And that's the thing that's the most expensive risk, because the most expensive thing you have is time, right? Like we all, and it's a cliche, but it's true, is time. So what you want to do is you want to, if there's not a market, you want to figure that out in the first month, 3 months, 6 months, a year. You don't want to figure it out after you've spent 2 years building a product or whatever it is, and then figuring out, oh, I was successful at building a product, but there's no market for this thing. There's no way I'm going to be able to sell it.
How do you test for market? Because everyone does customer discovery and they say, would you like this? And everyone goes, yes, I would. And they go, great, we've got a market. So how do you test for market and validation?
I'm a little bit old-fashioned this way. The way to test a market is to create something of value and get value in exchange, like money. Like build a product, charge for the. I'll tell you what HubSpot did, and this is one of the 1,000 things that my co-founder Brian and I like completely agreed on. Like we talked about this all the way through. It's like, okay, and we've talked about exactly this risk. It's like, okay, we're not splitting atoms. We're not creating a new energy source or putting someone on Mars. Let's assume right now that the product we have in mind that we'll be able to build. And so how do we figure out if there's a market or not? It's like, oh, well, the way to figure out if there's a market or not is to ask people for money and see if they give it to you. Okay, fine. Now, what do we need in order to ask people for money? Well, we need a product. Fine, we have a product in alpha. One could argue whether we should or shouldn't be charging for it. We're going to charge for it. And the other thing you need is a price. Because in order to ask for money, you have to know what you're going to ask for. All right. And so I'll tell you the conversation that Brian and I had in order to kind of determine the price for HubSpot in year one. Brian, by the way, context building, we had just been through 2 years of business school, right? So this is not like, oh, we're like, engineers had never heard, like, what's pricing? We had a pricing class, right? And so here's the conversation. It's like, we both agree we need to launch a product. Yes, we need to launch a product. We need to charge money. Yes, we need to charge money. What should we charge? I don't know. What do you think we should charge? I don't know. What do you think we should charge? How about $250 a month? Done. That was the extent of the kind of debate, discussion, analysis, supply-demand curves. It's like, so we picked our price point, and we launched it. And in hindsight, it was probably a little naive, but the one big value to it, it was simple. And the thing we were trying to do was we were not necessarily trying to optimize for the cash. Like, oh, what could we charge? Are we leaving money on the table? Are we leaving transactions on the table because we're too high, too low, whatever? Like the most important thing to us was data. It's like, okay, let's pick a point. Will people buy it or not? Even in its crappy form. And we will be transparent about it. It's like, this is an early product. They'll buy it. So the other important and right decision we made, number one, was getting a price out there, charging early, even though the product sucked. Decision number two is that we were 100% on a month-to-month program. So if you bought the product, in month 2, you figured out the product's, yes, it did suck, just like the founders told me, but the value wasn't high enough, you could cancel. So every month, any given customer could cancel, right? And it was that way for years at HubSpot. And the reason it was that way for years, even though all the signals and the advice are, oh, but you should go for longer term contracts because it'll raise your retention rates, and all that's true. But the thing we were trying to do is we were trying to maximize the number of data points because we were trying to gather evidence of a market. And the way to gather evidence of the market is to get the product out there, will they buy? And then given the discretion to leave, will they stay? Right? So if you sign a 1-year contract with a customer and they can't cancel in the first 12 months, you've far gone 11 points of data on that customer. You do not know whether they're happy or not. You do not know whether they're just staying because they have to and they're paying you anyway, or because they actually are getting value from the product. So anyway, I'm a massive believer in the importance of distribution, the importance of figuring out whether there's a market, and it's not about the. I mean, yes, you need to have a exceptional product, but more companies fail because they fail to find a market than because they fail to build a reasonable product.
Do you agree with Mark Andreessen's kind of statement of like what he has on the billboard, raise prices? And how do you think about that and some big lessons for you in terms of maybe where you fucked up pricing?
Yeah. I will say this. If you do raise prices, and we have over the years, most of the numbers you track will get better. And that's why, so I don't universally agree with that sentiment of just raise prices and everything will work itself out. And here's why. And this goes to the kind of enterprise versus SMB debate a little bit as well, is that as you raise prices, and then I'm talking primarily on subscription-based models now, which are slowly becoming the predominant model, it's relatively easy to raise prices. So for instance, and when we went from 250 to 500, we made a very simple decision very early that says, okay, everyone that had purchased the product at 250, we were not going to raise the price on them. So all new customers will pay the new price, all existing customers continue to pay the old price. And we held to that to this day. Anyway, it's a long story. But the reverse is not true. So let's say you raise the prices from 250 to 500 to 1,000, and then let's say you somehow figure out that you overshot the market. Like in the last price jump, either the market changed or you overestimated the value you were providing, whatever it is. Let's say the actual number should have been 700, just I'm making these numbers up. Now you have, let's say, 1,000 customers paying you $1,000, and now you're selling new customers at $700 because that's the right price. What do you do with those existing 1,000 customers? Well, the only reasonable answer is because it's a subscription model, is you have to give them the $700 price. All of a sudden, you've taken your revenue down, your recurring revenue down that everybody's looking at, everybody cares about, including your investors, by, in this example, 30%. That's a problem. And so that's why it almost never happens. You never see subscription companies reduce their prices because there's an immediate hit on the thing that we care most about, which is that ARR stream. So yes, try to find a good price, but I've always found that, I'm going to use it in an abstract sense, but I almost mean it in a mathematical sense, that generosity actually has a long-term return. And when I say generosity, I don't mean out of the kindness of your heart. I mean generosity that says you are always going to leave money surplus on the table, as economists might say, and say, oh, I'm charging less than the value that my customers ascribe to this thing. And there's a couple reasons to do that. One is it buys you optionality because you can always raise prices later. So why not keep them the same today, or and be generous? Builds goodwill. And then it's like when you have the inevitable downturn, which you will, you're already sort of in a relatively good position. It just tends to work out better. It's not to try and eke out every last kind of point of surplus and try to price optimize to not leave money on the table. I think that's long term, I don't think that's a great strategy.
I love that in terms of the generosity. I think one thing that really frustrates me right now, Dharmesh, is I see so many of my companies being like, we need to move to enterprise. We need to move to enterprise. And I'm going, we're at 800K ARR. I mean, we're so undersaturated on SMB. Why are we rushing to enterprise? What are your thoughts on startups that are rushing to enterprise? How do you advise them when their home is in SMB and they're going, we need to move to enterprise?
Yeah, so I have strong opinions on this, and I'll share them. So I told you when Brian and I started the company, kind of one of the top two reasons we started HubSpot was we wanted to work together. The second reason was we had a passion around SMB. Now I'll tell you why we had a passion around SMB. We both had grown up in enterprise software, right? That was our background. My first software startup was in enterprise software, and we knew it sort of sucked. Right, it had always kind of sucked. It's hard, I should say, but it's even harder now. So in the '90s, which is kind of the heyday of enterprise software, life was good. You signed multi-million-dollar contracts, but then you had this kind of over purchasing and you had this kind of glut. But then there's all this kind of downside to enterprise software, which is you get revenue concentration, and so you have a small number of customers paying you a lot of money, who thereby understandably have a strong degree of influence over the product roadmap and your vision, right? So you can have whatever vision you want, but if your number one customer says, I need you to build these three things over the course of the next year, it's hard to resist building those three things, especially if you're a startup, right? That's kind of thing number one. sales cycles are longer. So if you believe in this kind of iterative, so I believe that the smaller your feedback loop, the tighter that loop is, the more likely you are to succeed. I'm a big believer in the quality of the outcome is based on the number of iterations. That's the one predictor of it. So if I can go through something 1,000 times and someone else went through it 100 times, I'm going to do something fundamentally better. I just believe that as long as you have a data piping back into the system. On the enterprise side, because the sales cycles are so long, the amount of data coming in, and I'll say the amount of evidence, the amount of insight coming in is just 1/10 of what you would see in a non-enterprise company, right? When the sales cycle's just 1 month and you're signing 10 companies a month versus signing one every 6 months, you're just going to learn more. You're going to learn faster, more iterations. So that's one reason we didn't like enterprise. Now, let's go to the other end. Let's look at consumer products because we're just in business school. We had not, it's like we're just two friends chatting about startups. On the consumer side, the challenge there is most of the outcomes are bimodal. If you succeed in consumer, you might have the next Facebook, the next Google, the next whatever, because the consumer companies tend to, it's not a black and white thing, but you can have massive, massive outcomes because the market is so big. But you have also, if you don't succeed, you could go to zero because along the way, it was an advertising subsidized model. You had all these things, whatever, and there's very little gray area in between. There's not a lot of consumer products. It's like, oh yeah, we kind of built this thing for 4 years and we sold this consumer product company that didn't really kind of hit escape velocity, and we sold it and made $5 million. That almost never happens, right? So you get this kind of bimodal outcome, which we don't like. The value of SMB, we'll put the philosophical things for a little bit later. The value of SMB from an economics, from a startup perspective, is that you have the scale of consumer. There's literally millions of them out there, but then you have the business model of enterprise, which is you can actually charge people money. And you don't have the bimodal outcome that you have in consumer. So you have almost the best of both worlds. Now, that's a narrow view of it because the thing that kind of keeps people out of SMB or drags them up out of SMB is because the go-to-market distribution is hard. To make the physics work, to make the math work in SMB is non-trivial. This was definitely true 16 years ago when HubSpot started. And that was one of our number one challenges is convincing the investor community and everyone that was out there that you could actually build a big business in SMB because almost no one ever had. Right? Intuit's the only real example back then of a successful software company that was $10+ billion in market cap. You didn't really see a whole lot of that, right? As far as
my concern is as a generation of businesses, those SaaS businesses, which are using enterprise cost bases and applying them to SMB, where they're having sales reps close $3,000 contracts and having customer success managers. And I'm going, Dharmesh, this does not make sense as a financial engine. And they don't get it. And they go, but we'll scale into enterprise. How do you respond and advise them who are kind of trying to plaster on enterprise costs to this SMB distribution and then just thinking they'll scale into enterprise?
I think it's misguided. Let's close up on the SMB thing. We'll close up on one thought because I think it's important. Is that there's this thing in I'll say software, but even tech more broadly, which I call reverse gravity. That left to your own devices, your company will be pulled up into the enterprise. Always. And the only way not to be pulled up into the enterprise is you have to spend energy to resist that pull. And here's why. Is that so let's say wherever on the spectrum you are, and definitions vary in terms of what's considered SMB versus enterprise, doesn't really matter. But let's say you're at SMB now, and then someone talks you into, it's like, okay, we're going to nudge up the price point in the market. We're going to go, instead of going from 10 to 50 person companies, we're going to go from 50 to 500, whatever it is. As you move up, every single metric you track will improve. Everything, not like, oh, this thing got better, that, like just about everything you track will look better. Retention's better, getting better ARPU, average revenue per customer. All those things will look better. The one thing over the long term that almost is never better is the competitive dynamic. Because everyone got pulled up, so now you're sitting here in the enterprise thing and you're duking it out with every other company that over the course of the last N years has also been pulled up. And now it's like, oh, well, I'm now up against the incumbent that's really, really better at this than I am. It's like, okay, well, what is it that you have that's so special that's going to allow you to kind of scale up in the enterprise? So now back to your question, what would I tell those founders that are saying, oh, I'm going to do this kind of inefficiently. It's okay to do things that don't scale. That I'm okay with. If you're doing it for learning and you have a path, it's like, okay, well, this is the path all along, but you have to sort of have a plan that says, okay, well, here are the things that, because right now you're kind of judging your market based on the playground you're playing in, and you're saying, all what we're really doing is training to play over here at high altitude or something like that up in the mountains where you can barely take a breath. That's a problem, right? It's like if you're going to do that, then you have to collect evidence for the market you're going into, not for the market it's like that doesn't work because you're learning the wrong lessons. You're not learning how physics work in the world that you're trying to enter. That's not.
Yeah, applicability wise, like product messaging, product marketing, customer service, it's just so fundamentally different SME. So it's like false data.
Yes, it is.
Totally.
Not only does it not teach you the right lessons, it teaches you the wrong ones, right? It's almost like a negative value in some ways.
I totally agree. I often find it's kind of like a desperate search for more market, or when they don't have product market fit, when they try and go into enterprise as well. Similar to when they have a second product. A question that I have to you is, when's the right time to launch a second product? Often I feel it's just too early. How do you advise founders on when to launch a second product?
A couple of things. One is you need to know why you're launching a second product. That's the number one question. I'll give you buckets of reasons that are all good reasons. One could be we were growing really, really nicely, but we were growing so well that now we haven't hit like 100% saturation, but our growth rates are stalling because there's not that many customers left to sell to for which we would be an ideal fit. And so things are getting harder now in this market. That's bucket number one. Bucket number two, we're growing nicely. Still lots of headroom in terms of nowhere near saturation, still single-digit market share, but the category we're in is itself declining. We were doing great, but the ceiling happens to be now dropping. It's not that we hit the ceiling because we were growing, it's because the ceiling is dropping because there's not as big a market for that thing. That category is on the decline for whatever reason, so we need to kind of find something else. The third reason is there is an adjacent market that is a natural fit for the market we're in, and both for growth reasons and defensive reasons, we need to be in that other category. And this is the example of HubSpot. So HubSpot started in the marketing software business. And about, I'll say maybe 7 years in, we decided that, okay, well, we have marketing software and we loved it. We loved the category, it was growing. And that product now is over $1 billion in ARR. So had a fair amount of success with it. But we sort of saw the writing on the wall that says, okay, if you're using marketing software, the leads you're generating using HubSpot are going to go somewhere, and that somewhere is a CRM. So you're going to use Salesforce, you're going to use Dynamics, you're going to use one of the CRM products, which we knew because we were integrated with those products, as you would expect. But we came to the kind of realization that, oh, well, kind of marketing and sales CRM kind of go together. They're natural adjacency, number one. But number two, if we did not go into that second category, whoever was in that second category would ultimately also take over marketing, because the CRM data was the system of record, and it was a much stickier, much harder to dislodge. And it's like, okay, well, and we expected, and this is exactly what happened, that someday the CRM companies are going to say, oh, well, marketing is sort of part of what we do, and that's not going to be a happy day for HubSpot. So anyway, either your revenue, your growth is stalling, the category is dropping, or there's a natural adjacency, either for offensive or defensive reasons, or both.
How do you determine between an ancillary and a distraction? There's a fine line between the two.
Okay, so a couple of things. One is, so I'm a big believer, a really big believer in focus. And so my advice, and this is going to sound kind of paradoxical, is founders should put off the second product for as long as they can, but not forever. And the reason I say as long as they can is because when you add the second product, everyone will measure all the goodness that will come from it. And let's assume right now that all the data you're projecting is going to be right. The revenues are going to grow this way, and you're going to be able to sell X units, and this is going to be awesome for the second product. Let's just stipulate that you are correct about your projections. What people don't realize is the flip side of the equation is the increase in complexity when you go from product n equals 1 to product n equals 2. And that is a huge gap because everything in the business when you launch your second product becomes harder. Every decision becomes harder. Every chart that you look at now, you're then going to want to break down. It's like, oh yeah, here's our growth overall. How does that break down by product one, product two? Oh, we're going to invest in R&D and we just hired 10 engineers. How do we decide whether they work on product one or product two? Oh, we have this ability to do a massive campaign. We got a marketing budget. It's December. We're trying to use up some funds. How do we decide whether we're going to promote product number one or product number two? Everything you look at. And it's not an incremental increase in complexity. It's a new dimension of complexity, right? It's like you're adding another axis to your business. So you had the x-axis, life was good, product one, and now you have a y-axis, and now you're living in a two-dimensional world instead of a one-dimensional world.
How do you think about resourcing for second product? Is it like, hey, very lean, test, very cheap, see what we can do MVP? Or is it that never works? You're either all in or all out. How do you recommend on the resourcing for new products?
It's a great question. I've tried it both ways. Personally, and this might be symptomatic of HubSpot, but in our world, we tend to do better with going all in and not doing experiments. It's okay, we might be wrong. We made this decision. Here's the thing we're going to do. And this is not an experiment. This is not a drill. We are going to do this. So when we did decide to go into CRM, it was not, let's try to build a CRM product and we'll do it as cheaply as, I'm not saying you shouldn't be scrappy, you should. But in terms of commitment to it, I sort of believe, and it might vary in other companies. Other companies might be better at this than we are, but I believe in self-fulfilling prophecies when it comes to product investment. That says, if you decide that you are going to conquer this category and build this new product that's going to be game-changing for you and you're going to do it, then you're going to put the best people on it. You're going to put the resource, and you're going to leave no stone unturned. You're going to leave no obstacle in the path because you are all in on this bet. And to the degree you do that, this is relatively intuitive. It's like, okay, well, if you do that, the odds of that thing succeeding go up. But here's the thing you have to be careful of, is that bet has to be worth winning, right? So if you're making an all-in bet and the return, even if you succeed at the thing you're trying to do, it's barely going to move the needle. It's going to be an incremental, we're going to go from 40 points of growth to 6. That's not worth it. It has to be game-changing like it was for us with CRM. That was a kind of, we didn't pivot the company, but a pivotal moment in HubSpot history, getting into marketing and sales software that the company wouldn't be where it is today if we had not made that choice. So I'm not saying I'm right on this one. I've tried it the other way. The challenge with the other way is then you have to operate in a little bit like a VC model, where you have 1,000 flowers bloom, or let's say 20 flowers bloom. We're going to have a bunch of experiments, and then you're going to have quarterly meetings to see how everyone's doing, and you're going to measure on whatever metrics you collectively decide, and then you're going to kill off the ones that aren't working, and you're going to double down on the ones that are working, and then you're going to get to Series A and Series B and Series C, and then ultimately, and it sounds good in theory, it's just really hard to execute. And maybe others are better at it. But
when I spoke to Danny Herzberg before the show, she said that you were the disruptor from within constantly, whether it's on startups, whether it's inbound. How do you think about effective disruption from within to prevent apathy and, bluntly, HubSpot's a very big public company, lethargy, actually? How do you disrupt from within so effectively?
I might qualify the effectively part. I think we do it reasonably well. But so here's the thing. So I've reduced the things that I work on at HubSpot, and this has been the case for now a decade, down to 3 things. And I change them periodically, but I get it down to exactly 3 things. And I'll tell you what my 3 things are right now. It's platform, the thing we're building, brand, which is the story of HubSpot, and the third thing, which is I think the longest running thing, ever since I've been tracking these 3 things, this has been on my list of 3 things, is boldness. And what I mean by that is that a non-0% of my waking hours and even my non-waking hours are around how do I push the org to take more calculated risk. It's as simple as that. It's like, okay, what is it that's keeping us from it? Are we not scared enough? Do we not see this particular trend coming? Are we like, we've got our product roadmap laid out, which most companies do at scale. It's like, okay, we have in our heads 15 other years worth of here's the things we could do. Customers are asking for it. They are no-brainer investments. We can add these features to these products, and we will make money. Like hands down, we will make money. And so how do you fight that? And the way you do it, so we did this with CRM. That one was an existential crisis, right? And so there's nothing that motivates more than an existential crisis. Like, okay, if we don't do this, like we may not have a company, right? Like it's just a matter of time. We don't want someone else to control our destiny. You may not have a convenient existential crisis. That's when it gets harder. But the way to kind of push it is you have to win the battle at a macro level first. And this is the Clay Christensen Innovator's Dilemma thing, right? It's like, good people, good managers will always run the existing business really, really well. That's why they got to where they are. That's why the business is where it is. So you have to, as an organization, decide, however you structurally do it, that says we're going to spend some percentage of our resources on outlier bets that have a disproportionate return, right? And if this is I'm not a finance guy, but this is like pure portfolio theory 101, right? Especially VC theory 101. That says, okay, well, it's okay for us to have, and VC is even more extreme, right? Because you have to have the bimodal outcomes. But it's like, okay, well, it's great and it's fine that 80%, 90%, 95% of our resources are on things that are predictable outcomes and great outcomes. Don't get me wrong, the return on the investment is great. But some portion of our portfolio has to be allocated towards things that can have a 10x, 100x, or higher kind of return. Because otherwise, we're going to be caught by the regression to the mean over time, right? It's like we keep doing it. Growth will look good until it stops looking good. Everything will be good until the market stops looking good. And then we're going to have wish that we dug the well when the house wasn't on fire, right? It's something that's a constant drumbeat, right? This is the thing you have to, and you have to kind of give people the confidence. This is like, I know this is uncomfortable. I know this, and I'm not going to tell you which bets to make. All I'm telling you is that you as an individual, your team as a team, and the company as a company needs to be investing a non-zero percentage. You get to decide what that is, but the answer can't be zero, that we're going to do 100% on things we know.
How do you let people know they can fail without creating a culture that very freely accepts failure? You want them to take risk, but
totally. And it's like, the easiest way is to celebrate failure. So even at we'll have all hands meetings where we'll talk about it. We have a failure forum, especially within kind of product and engineering. Here are things that we tried that did not work. Okay, and that's fine. So we learn the lesson, we move on. And so that basically sends a signal. And this is particularly useful for high growth companies, right? The thing we don't realize, like if you're growing headcount 50 to 100%, or at least you were up in 2021, that means every all hands meeting you have, a decent percentage of the company, this is the first all hand meetings they've ever been to. So, founders often will walk around and it's like, oh, well, I've already said this thing like 100 times around culture, around risk, around boldness, around whatever. It's like, yes, but 40% of the people in this room have never heard us say those words in that order before, right? Like they've never heard it. And maybe they read some of it in the culture code deck, but they've never really heard it. And so that's the key, is that you cannot rely on osmosis for anything good that's going to happen. You have to sort of beat the drum. And the only way to know whether you've kind of said the same thing enough times is when people get tired of hearing it, and then you need to say it a few more times. This is when everyone's tired of hearing it. But yeah.
What were the biggest breakpoints in HubSpot scaling?
So I don't think about it in terms of headcount. I think about it in terms of milestones in the company. One was around, so we had a relatively smooth growth curve, relatively predictable. It's a textbook case. But when we went, I'll give you a few examples. Product 2, big, lots of pain going to product 2. First of all, just making a decision to do product 2, right? That was big. Going international, it's like, okay, well, we're going to not just sell to the United States, and we're not going to just take customers of convenience because we have this thing called the internet. Fine, we were selling internationally, but we weren't really selling internationally, right? The product wasn't localized. We had no sales team anywhere other than, we had no support in other languages, all those things. So that was another kind of pivotal point. When we went public, that's another pivotal point.
Why was product 2 so painful?
Because we had already built the strength and been so good at inbound marketing and marketing software for years and years and years, growing fast, raised funding, and we were about to go into an IPO, And the year before the IPO is when we made this brilliant decision. It's like, oh, we're getting into CRM, right? But it was painful because it was supposed to be painful, right? It's like we did the equivalent of like Volvo trying to start getting into like racing cars or something, like, sports vehicles. Like, that's not what they're known for, right? Like HubSpot was known for marketing. We create a category called inbound marketing, and we're associated with that. And it's scary, not that we couldn't do it. It was still software. But like, did we have the market's permission to actually go do that thing, right? It's like, how would our customers react to this? And then, what new like muscle group do we need to, like with inbound marketing, we had a very strong point of view on what was broken with marketing. It wasn't about the product, it wasn't about the software, it was about this entire movement that was happening. And we got up on stages and talked about it, wrote a book, have an event with 30,000 people. Like, it was a movement. And now we're getting into an area we don't know hardly anything about. There is no strong strong point of view. It's like, oh, here's why CRM is broken, and this is why ours is better. It's like, that would have been inauthentic to say that at the time. So that's why. It's like everything we knew, we were not abandoning, but we were like, we're going into uncharted territory with unproven returns.
Do you not think the state of product marketing stays pretty abysmal? I look at everything and I'm like, it's neutral. Nothing makes me feel anymore. Nothing excites me. It's all the same case studies, logos, very bland, and nothing excites me. How do you think about the state of product marketing today, and what makes truly exceptional product marketing to you?
To me, product marketing is all about it's all about community, and not an abstract sense, right? So one of the things that I think HubSpot got right is that we were kind of builders of community well before we even had a product, right? Like, we were out there kind of congealing these things like, okay, well, we're going to say that marketing is broken and people are doing spammy stuff, and there's this new way called inbound marketing. We'd have nodding of heads, right? And it's like we start the blog and we start the event, and we're trying to get that flywheel of like, we want to find like-minded people and pull them together, and they're out there. And part of the thing we did, which I think companies should do, and I don't mean in a sensationalistic way, but you have to kind of polarize your market. Yeah. 100% of the people cannot agree with what you're saying, because then you're basically in the middle, you've regressed the mean. Sorry, do not pass go, do not collect $200, right? You're done. So what we did is we said, by the way, everything you've done in marketing doesn't work anymore, does it? Like, you go to these events and you try to take a trade show booth, and the only 3 people that came by the booth are your competitors, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh, you sent your last kind of physical direct mail campaign or whatever, and you have no idea whether that's doing anything for you or whatever, and then people are giving you a hard time internally because you're wrecking the environment, right? It's like, yeah, right. By the way, like, if you're trying to sell to a VP of marketing, you're creating an existential crisis in their head when you tell them that everything they know how to do well is no longer relevant. And that's exactly what we did, right? We're like, that's great. You built this career, like, and you're great at these things. I'm not saying you should go to zero, but I'm telling you, you're not going to be able to do that anymore, because all the things that you track, I'll bet you money, they're already going down, and that's not going to turn unless you take a change in direction. And here's the right way. That's so product marketing should be about a community and a story they believe in, and that story has to be a story that not everyone believes in.
Do you hate the way that community is so thrown around today? You've built communities for years. Now community is the buzzword. Do you hate it? And what do you think people misunderstand by the buzzword of community?
It's the same. We're an industry of buzzwords, right? It's what people don't realize about community is the same thing and this is not everyone, right? It's the 95% of the people that give the real 5% a bad name, right? The issue is that community is really around unlocking value for the community members. Fundamentally, that's what it is, right? It's like, and that is, if you look at the kind of roots of the word itself, that's what it is. It's going to come together as a community. And we think of it as like, oh, basically a community is just a list of people I can market to that have opted in or whatever and will show up at my event or show up for my webinar. That's not community. A real community is one when the community participants are getting value from each other. And you're there as the host, you're not up on stage, right? That's the thing. It's like, oh, we've got this community in the room here of 5,000 people. That's not a community. The community is when those 5,000 people go out into the hallways and talk to each other. That's the community, not in the room when you're doing your keynote speech, right? That's the, anyway. So yes, we do get it wrong. And if you think about it correctly, it says, okay, who are the people I'm trying to reach and trying to sell to whom this kind of story resonates? And then how can I best, and maybe it's an online community, maybe it's throwing up a Discord channel, whatever it is, how do I help those people connect? That's what community is. And then you have to have belief that if you pull those people together, value gets created both for them and then incidentally for you, because you are the one that hosted, you are the one that told the story, and you're the one that pulled them together.
I know we've gone on. I do have two more questions for a quick fire. One was, I got an email from old employee of yours, and they said that you had amazing answers to this for 4 years running when they were at HubSpot for 4 years, but they want to know your answer now. They asked, what is a high conviction belief you have about technological, political, or societal changes that most people aren't noticing? So in 2017, they said crypto. 2018, you said CEOs being more political. 2019, remote work. 2020, every company will be a media company. What would the answer be in 2022?
My answer would be that the way buyers and sellers connect is fundamentally broken because you don't own your data. The consumers don't own the data right now. So here's what's happening. And we kind of experience this in the consumer world already, which is, like when I tweet, Twitter gets 100% of whatever economic value that I create, right? Like directly, if they're going to advertise against it, they may sell subscriptions against it, whatever it happens to be. I make nothing. When you fill out your LinkedIn profile, you're going to tell them your work history, and the value you're hoping, like when people originally sign up, is that, it helps me be more discoverable in order to get a job. Mm-hmm. But then after that, it's like, if you're not looking for a job, like what was that creating for you? And the answer is, they will essentially license / sell / make that data accessible, and you get exactly 0% of that value. And I'm not saying either of those companies are bad companies. I'm saying the model is broken, and that in the future, that there will be a more direct, because...
Well, do you get 0% of that value? Because you get distribution, I get distribution, and then we monetize that distribution. You with the Wordle competitor, you could sell it, you could sell premium. I monetize my distribution with sponsorships and with a ton. So we do get value.
We do on the company side. Yes, on the personal side, you're building brand, but it's an indirect value. So let's say we were even to monetize. Like, okay, this is the value that I actually got. The question is, if you even lump that in, what percentage of the overall value that was created went to the creator of that value versus the intermediary, right? It's like, okay, well, companies are buying. It's like, if I want to recruit, I go to LinkedIn, I do a recruitment database search or whatever, and I make hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in revenue. How much of that actually flows back to the actual consumers and owners of that data? That's the thing I wonder.
Totally. How does that change?
I don't know. I don't know. I think the way it's changed in the past is that as you think through creating, so here's and this has been true of me since I was a little child in the dusty streets of India, is that I'm a big believer that over the fullness of time, markets become more efficient. All markets. And the definition of an inefficient market is when a buyer and seller should be coming together, but don't. As a result of non-discoverability, as a result of non-trust, any number of reasons, a transaction that should have happened doesn't, is the kind of signal of an inefficient market. An efficient market is one that all transactions that should have occurred occur. Is a layperson's definition, so if you believe that, then what intermediaries are doing are basically saying, I'm going to allow these transactions that weren't happening before. I'm eBay, I'm LinkedIn, whatever it is, right? That's what they're doing. They're making an inefficient market more efficient and taking some percent of the value as their tax, as their commission for making that transaction possible, which is completely reasonable, right? That's fine. My thesis is that the market over the fullness of time will find increasingly efficient ways to make the market more efficient. And we're not quite there yet, and we may be at a pivotal point in history where technology is starting to come together and to make a nonlinear jump in the way we make markets more efficient versus what we may have had with Web 1 and Web 2. That's the
final question before we move into a quick fire. You're on the cap table also of some of the biggest and best companies today as an investor. What's been your biggest... How has angel investing impacted your operating mindset most?
A lot. So, by the way, so I got into angel investing when I was a grad student with Brian. And the reason I got into it, I'll tell you the quick story, is I had promised my wife I was not going to do another startup. Right? That was the standing agreement. And then so I decided, I really like startups. Maybe I'll invest in startups so I can live vicariously through other entrepreneurs, right? That was, like it made sense. It's like having a niece or a nephew. It's like you get to play with them, but then you can kind of hand them back to their parents, and then you go back about and live your life, right? It's like, that sounds awesome. I get to, whenever I want, I can go have the excitement and go in strategy meetings if I want to and do all those things. And then I can just kind of, step back into the shadows. Okay. So that was the original plan. That's why I started angel investing. And then we made the decision to start HubSpot. And so I had a decision. It's like, okay, well, do I continue angel investing? And my first immediate reaction was no, because I'm such a big believer in focus. I'm like, I can't do that and do this. That just doesn't compute. So the decision I made is like, okay, well, there is value to angel investing. Here's what I'll do. I will set up guardrails for myself. And these are extreme, by the way. So number one principle of my angel investing is solve for minimizing time, not maximizing return. Because realize I'm the co-founder of a new startup. It's like, okay, the thing I don't have is time. I do have money. I can write checks, but I don't have time. And so everything else flowed from that.
What's an example of that? Minimizing time, not maximizing value.
I'll give you the top ones. No founder calls or founder meetings at all. Even pre-investment, even during the decision process.
How do you decide?
Investment decision within 24 hours, if not 2.
How do you decide without meeting the founder?
Over email. How do you decide anything?
Well, I speak to you, I hear about your story, about growing up, the ambition, the motive. I get a sense of who you are and why you're building a HubSpot. If I don't meet you...
But what I said was, I don't have phone calls, I don't have meetings. I will exchange emails, right? I have by the way, this is a topic for another day. I have an internal product I built for myself that indexes 2+ million word emails that I've had across my entire professional career. So I can do analysis in like mean time between responses and things like that in terms of, anyway. But so I have a finely tuned mechanism to kind of judge people just based on tone of email and timeliness of email. So let's say it's like 3 days before YC demo day, and I come across the company and it's like, oh, this is interesting. I send an email to the founder. The best founders, even the ones that already have VCs interested and banging down their door before demo day, the best founders, out of a sense of humility, will respond. Even if it's a quick response, like, Dharmesh, I'm sorry it took me 4 hours to respond, but I'm in the midst of getting ready for demo day or whatever. It's like, it comes through. And then the arrogance will also come through, right? It's like, okay, either non-response, which and it's fine. Even if like a week later, they're like, oh, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't respond to you. But it's like, anyway, so humility, that kind of ego versus accomplishment ratio strikes high for me. And then due diligence in my mind is unnecessary, at least for me personally, because like, okay, well, there's no diligence to do. Like I can't do that. I'm not smarter. I'm not gonna be able to study markets. I don't have the time. And it's worked out. So I would put, all modesty aside, I would put my 100+ company portfolio over the course of 16 years against any early stage portfolio that's out there.
I know, I've seen it, Dharmesh. I would too. My question is, okay, so no founder meetings, one. What are the other guardrails?
No negotiating terms. So someone else leads the deal, because negotiating terms requires you to actually spend time and do that. So all these things kind of flow to the kind of minimized time. This is economically suboptimal. I don't do follow-on investments. And here's why. Because if I was going to do a follow-on investment, then I have to kind of pick which of the companies am I going to do follow-on and which ones am I going to not participate on the follow-on rounds. If I don't participate in certain ones, then there's a signaling problem for the founders. Like, okay, well, why did Dharmesh choose not to follow on with you? The way I have it now, 100% of the companies I don't do follow-on, there is no signaling problem because everyone knows that. I've put it publicly out there. I tell the founders going in, this is my style, this is what I do. So a bunch of problems, and I don't have to spend the time learning about whether the company is worth a follow-on investment or not. It's like, doesn't matter. I'm not going to do a follow-on investment. I'm going to move on to the next one because that decision I can make in an hour because it goes back to kind of step one. So.
I love that. Have you made any mistakes angel investing where you're like,
yes.
Oh, dull match?
Yes. Couple of them. One is investing in ideas that involved atoms instead of just bits. And that's a whole different, so I only invest in software because anytime you have a physical product, not to say people haven't created obviously trillion-dollar companies with physical products like Apple, but it's just a hard business, one I don't know anything about. So I've made that mistake, I think, twice, and it was earlier in my thing. And then secondly is not trusting my instincts when kind of my ego accomplishment thing was raising yellow flags. Like, okay, well, I fell too much in love with the idea and what the company was doing and didn't read the signals. It's like, okay, this founder doesn't feel like the Harry Stebbings of the world. He doesn't have that high bar of humility.
You don't know me at all if you think the high bar of humility with me. Final one. What's the biggest miss? Everyone has a miss.
The biggest miss, let's see. I've had a lot. Dropbox was one, and it was a weird story. And it was a miss because Drew and I were already friends. I knew him before he started Dropbox. Talked him out of the prior startup he was going to do. We would meet regularly. He's another MIT guy. And it was a miss because he thought me too much of a friend to ask, and I thought him too much of a friend to offer. And so it was much years later, that's like, wow, that was stupid. Can I invest? It's like, and so I did. And I had a couple of investments that got acquired by Dropbox, so I ended up having pre-IPO shares, but I was not in that first round, so silly reasons, but yeah.
That is very funny. Tough when it's friends as well. And yeah, I totally get that. Listen, I want to move into my favorite, which is a quick fire round. I could talk to you all day, Dharmesh. This has been fantastic. Yeah. So let's start with your favorite book and why.
My favorite fiction book is Les Miserables, Victor Hugo. And the reason is because it's the best book written of all time. That's an easy answer. Everyone should read it. My favorite, this gets harder as far as nonfiction. I really like Getting to Yes. It's a negotiation book. That's one that I have read multiple times. I love Innovator's Dilemma because that's sort of part of my job. So I reread that every couple of years and send people excerpts from it. So that's probably high on my list, but yeah.
30 seconds.
It's weird. Books are harder now than they were 10 years ago. It's because there's so much good content on the internet. That's part of it, but it feels like business books particularly have become a little bit formulaic.
Oh, totally.
It's like the first 15 to 17% is really good. It's like that's the book the author wanted to write, and then the rest of it is what the publisher forced them to write to fill the pages to get to 240 or whatever the page count has to be for an average business book. So.
I totally agree with you. Because what's your biggest strength and your biggest weakness? 30 seconds on each.
Okay. Biggest strength is the ability to separate skills from talent. Skills are learnable things, and talent is just ability to acquire skills faster. So don't let the lack of talent hold you back. Learn whatever you need to learn.
And then your biggest weakness?
I'm pathologically non-confrontational. And that's why I'm a terrible manager. That's why I have no direct reports, because I am I'm too polite, I'm too non-confrontational, and you need to be able to, like in a kind way, though those things are not correlated, is hold people accountable, push back on them, give them constructive criticism, all things I am terrible at doing, honestly.
If you didn't start this was from Kieran, if you didn't start HubSpot, what company would you have started instead?
I wouldn't have started a company. I would have stuck by my agreement to my wife and gone off and taught. That's probably the most likely path.
What piece of advice do you often give but find hard to follow yourself?
You should take care of your health.
What do you know now that you wish you'd known at the start of HubSpot?
That the SMB bet is going to work out, that the non-believers are going to be proven wrong.
What would you most like to change about the world of startups, Dharmesh?
I would like more founders to be focused maniacally on the customer problem and not get married to their solutions too early.
Who's the unsung hero of the HubSpot journey?
Our partners. We have 5,000 of them, but they're the ones that were the story consumers, and they're the ones that helped kind of spread the word to the other 140,000 people that are now customers.
Penultimate one. What 3 traits would you most like your son to adopt?
Drive or ambition, kindness, and a builder mentality. Create things.
Final one. Next 5 years for you and for HubSpot. Paint that picture for me. It's 2027. We have this again. Where will you be?
Probably in this chair, HubSpot will have grown further and solved more of our customer problems. Feels like we're in early innings. We're like in the second inning of a of a baseball game. It's just so much work left to be done. Yeah.
Dharmesh, I've absolutely loved this. I so appreciate the time, and you've been a hero to do it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.